He cast me and our daughters out into a raging blizzard, simply because I couldn't give him a son. 3 years later, he sent me an invitation to his wedding, eager to show off his perfect heir and utterly destroy my reputation. But when my private jet landed on his lawn, revealing the truth he had tried so hard to hide, his smile instantly froze. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, grab a cup of warm tea and get comfortable. I'd love to know what time of day you're watching this. Please write M in the comments if it's morning, A for afternoon, or E for evening. And now, let me draw you into this story. The roar of the engines was the first thing they heard. It began as a low, deep hum in the distance, easily ignored over the clinking of champagne flutes and the quiet melody of a string quartet. But within seconds, the sound intensified, swelling into a deafening, chest-vibrating thunder that drowned out everything else at the exclusive Hamptons resort. I watched the scene unfold through the small, oval window of the Gulfstream G650 as the perfectly manicured green lawn rushed up to meet us. From this height, the wedding guests looked like panicked ants scattering in every direction. The white folding chairs, the intricate floral arches, a massive ice sculpture of a swan, everything literally trembled from the sheer power of our approach. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from a potent mix of adrenaline and pure cold satisfaction. I smoothed the fabric of my cornflower blue dress. It was a color Grant had always strictly forbidden me to wear. He said it was too bold, too flashy, and that a wife's job was to blend into the background, to be a pale, pastel accessory to his dark suits. Today, I was anything but a quiet background. "Are you ready, Mom?" Hazel asked, reaching over to squeeze my hand. She was 13 now, incredibly bright, and fiercely protective of me. "I was born ready for this day," I whispered, though my voice trembled slightly. Beside her, Holly stared out the window with a smile that was almost predatory. "Just look at his face, Mom, just look at him." I followed her gaze. Down below, standing on the raised platform that served as an altar, was Grant. Even from this distance, I could see the blood drain from his face. He was clutching the microphone as if it were a lifeline, his mouth agape in a comical O. Next to him stood Tiffany, his bride-to-be, who at that moment looked less like a blushing bride and more like an enraged stone statue, instinctively covering her stomach with her hands. The pilot executed a textbook, an incredibly soft landing on the private airstrip adjacent to the lawn. That airstrip belonged to the resort, and Grant hadn't managed to secure it for his exclusive use because he was too cheap to pay the extra fee for the reservation. The jet taxied slowly, turning so the door faced the assembled crowd of 300 high society guests. His investors were there, his business rivals, the entire social elite, the very people he had been feeding lies about me for the last 3 years. The engines began to wind down until, finally, a profound silence fell. That silence felt much heavier than the earlier noise. All eyes were on us. The door opened with a hiss. The stairs unfolded automatically. I stood up, taking a deep breath. I was no longer just Meredith, the abandoned ex-wife. I was not the woman who had been ruthlessly thrown out into the snow. I was the architect of my own destiny, and I was about to bring his entire structure of lies crashing down. "Let's go, girls," I said. I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. The wind caught my dress, making the cornflower blue silk billow around me like a cape. I held my head high, descending the steps with the grace of a woman who knows she owns the ground she walks on. Holly and Hazel followed close behind, dressed in matching designer outfits that screamed understated luxury and newfound confidence. And behind us, stepping out last with an aura of calm, almost dangerous authority, was Preston. A collective gasp of shock rippled through the crowd. I saw heads turning, whispers spread like wildfire. Is that Meredith? My God, look at her. And Preston Vance. What is he doing with her? I walked straight toward the red carpet that led to the altar. I didn't wait for an invitation. I didn't wait for anyone's permission. The security guards Grant had hired looked utterly bewildered. They didn't know whether to stop a woman who had just arrived in a multi-million-dollar plane or simply get out of her way. They chose the latter. Grant's face had already shifted from pale to a sickly shade of purple. He dropped the microphone, his hands trembling. "Meredith," he choked out, his voice breaking without the amplification. What are you doing here? You're ruining everything." I stopped about 10 feet from him. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled, a cold, dazzling smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Ruin it?" I asked, my voice crystal clear in the deafening silence. "Oh, Grant, I didn't come here to ruin anything. You invited me, remember? You sent that letter, practically begging me to show up, writing that you wanted to show everyone what a modern, happy, and blended family we are. You wanted to salvage your reputation so your company's stock prices would finally stop plummeting. I reached into my handbag and pulled out not a wedding gift, but a thick paper envelope. You wanted to put on a show so badly, Grant, I said, stepping onto the platform. The click of my heels on the wood echoed like gunshots in the silence. So I brought you the grand finale. Grant lunged forward, trying to snatch the envelope from my hand, his eyes wild with panic. Don't you dare! Security! Get her out of here! But Preston was suddenly beside me, blocking Grant with a single, firm step. Preston didn't have to shout, he just looked at Grant, and the man froze in his tracks. I turned to the crowd, to the cameras that were undoubtedly recording everything, and to the man who had once tried to destroy me. I held the envelope high. 3 years ago, you threw your own children out into a snowstorm. Just because they weren't boys, I said, my voice as hard as steel. Today, you're marrying this woman because she promised you a son. But before you say I do, there's something you all need to know about your perfect heir. Grant looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Tiffany let out a terrified squeak, and in that split second, I knew I had won. Before I tell you exactly what was in that envelope and how Grant's entire life fell apart in the next 5 minutes, we have to go back to where this nightmare began. To understand the immense weight of that moment on the lawn, you have to rewind 3 years. You have to trade that lush green grass and private jet for the icy gray sky over a winter city, for the smell of chimney smoke mixed with the bitter taste of betrayal. It was Christmas Eve, the kind of winter night where the wind howls around the corners of the house like a wounded animal. I was in the study of our suburban estate, the house we called home. I was just finishing the final blueprints for the Lakeview Spire development, a 40-story commercial complex that was supposed to be the crown jewel of Grant's development company. I had spent 6 months on those drawings, late nights, missed dinners, working while the twins were long asleep. Grant was the face of the company, the charismatic guy who shook hands and cut ribbons. But I was the architect. I was the one who made sure his buildings didn't collapse. I was the one who navigated the zoning nightmares. But my name never appeared on the documents. It was always just his company's logo. I told myself it didn't matter. We were a team, a marriage, and his success was our family's success. I heard the creak of the heavy oak door. Grant came in. He smelled of expensive whiskey and the cold night air. He didn't even glance at the blueprints spread across my desk, at the work that was supposed to save his company from the financial crisis it was in. We need to talk, he said. His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth he usually faked so well. I looked up at him, rubbing my tired eyes. Can it wait, honey? I just need to double-check the atrium plans. If we win this bid, the bonus will cover the girls' private school tuition for the next 5 years. Grant laughed. It was a dry, unpleasant sound. He walked to the desk, picked up the rolled-up blueprints, and looked at them with disdain. There won't be any tuition, Meredith. Certainly not for them. He turned and walked toward the fireplace, where embers glowed cheerfully. Before I could even process what was happening, he threw the rolled-up schematics straight into the fire. Grant, I screamed, lunging forward. What are you doing? That's the only original. He grabbed my wrist, his grip so tight it would leave bruises, and pushed me back against the desk. I don't care about the building, Meredith. I don't care about your little drawings. We're done. My heart stopped. Done? What do you mean? I want a divorce. He spat the words out as if they had a foul taste. I'm done. I'm done waiting. 10 years, Meredith. 10 years. And what have you given me? He said our daughters' names, Holly and Hazel, as if he were talking about a disease. 2 girls. Useless. My father built this company from the ground up. I need a grandson. I need a son to carry on the name, to take over this legacy. And you? He looked me up and down with a sneer that made my skin crawl. Your genetics are garbage. You can't give me a king. I stared at him, breathless. A king? Grant, this isn't the Middle Ages. We have 2 wonderful, brilliant daughters. They get straight A's. Holly is a math genius. Hazel plays the violin beautifully. They're girls, Grant roared, his face turning red. They'll marry some other guy and change their names. They won't carry on my legacy. I need a male heir, and I'm not wasting another year with a mare that can't produce a racehorse. The cruelty of his words hit me harder than any physical blow. So that's it? You're throwing away our marriage, our family, because of the gender of our children? This is about survival, he answered coldly, adjusting his cufflinks. And I've already found someone who can give me what I need. Someone younger, with better genes. I felt the room spin. You're cheating on me? I'm securing my future, he corrected. Now, pack your things. I want you out of here. Out? Grant, it's Christmas Eve. It's 10 degrees outside. The roads are a sheet of ice. Not my problem, he shot back, walking to the door. The house is in my name. The accounts are in my name. My lawyers will be in touch about the divorce settlement, which, frankly, will be zero, considering you signed a prenup without reading it closely. I helped build this company, I cried, the tears finally starting to flow. Those plans, half the portfolio, that's my work. Prove it, he smirked, a cold, triumphant grin. Your name isn't on a single contract. In the eyes of the law, you were just a housewife with a little doodling hobby. He opened the door and gestured down the hall. You have 30 minutes. Take the girls and get out. If you're not gone by the time I finish my drink, I'm calling the police and reporting you for trespassing. I stood there, shaking, watching the fire consume months of my hard work. But it wasn't just architectural plans burning in that fireplace. It was my trust, my love, and a decade of my life wasted on a man who saw me as nothing more than a broken incubator. I didn't beg. I didn't scream. I thought of Holly and Hazel upstairs, sleeping peacefully in their pajamas, dreaming of Santa Claus. I had to be strong. I wiped my face, straightened my back, and walked past him. You'll regret this, Grant, I whispered. You think you're a king? You're just a fool in a crown of fake gold. He just snorted with laughter. Get out, Meredith, and take your useless daughters with you. That laughter followed me up the stairs and would echo in my nightmares for years to come. But I had no idea that the nightmare was only just beginning. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest he was about to unleash on us. The hallway seemed to stretch for miles as I ran toward the girls' room. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the doorknob. Inside, the room was warm, lit by the soft glow of a star-shaped nightlight. Holly and Hazel were sleeping soundly, tangled in their comforters. I took a deep breath, forcing the panic into a tight ball in my stomach. I couldn't scare them, not yet. Girls, I whispered, shaking them gently. Wake up. We're going on an adventure. Hazel rubbed her eyes, blinking sleepily. Mom, is it Christmas morning already? The innocence in her question shattered my heart into a million pieces. No, sweetie. Something came up. We have to spend the night in a hotel. We're going to have a pajama party. Holly sat up, sensing the tension immediately. She was always the more perceptive one. Why are you crying? Was Dad yelling again? We just need to pack, I evaded, pulling 2 suitcases from the closet. Quickly, warm clothes, jackets, boots, scarves, anything you have that's warm. We threw things into the bags chaotically. I grabbed their school uniforms, a few favorite books, and a small jewelry box my grandmother had left me, the only valuable thing Grant hadn't bought me. I didn't take any of the jewelry from Grant. I didn't want to wear his chains anymore. Downstairs, the clock chimed the hour. 20 minutes had passed. We walked down the grand staircase, carrying our own luggage. Grant was standing in the foyer, but he wasn't alone. His parents, Robert and Eleanor, were there. They lived in the guest house on the property and must have come over when they saw the lights. For a second, a spark of hope flickered in my chest. Surely Robert and Eleanor wouldn't let this happen. Eleanor knitted sweaters for the girls. Robert taught them to play chess. Eleanor, I pleaded, stopping at the bottom of the stairs. Please, talk to him. He's throwing us out in a blizzard. Eleanor looked at me, her face a mask of icy indifference. She was wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of sherry. She glanced at Holly and Hazel, her own granddaughters, then looked away. Grant tells us you've been emotionally unstable, Eleanor said, her voice smooth and venomous. That you've been having fits, hysterics. I was stunned. That's a lie. You know me. I've been working on the new tower project. A woman's mind isn't built for business, my dear, Robert interjected, stepping forward. It puts a strain on the system, negatively impacts motherhood. It's probably why you couldn't produce a male heir. You used up all your energy trying to act like a man. I stared at them in horror. The apple hadn't fallen far from the tree. All of Grant's rottenness came directly from these spoiled roots. They didn't care about the girls. They only cared about the dynasty. Grandma, Hazel whispered, her voice trembling. It's so cold outside. Eleanor took a sip of her sherry. You should listen to your father. Children should be seen and not heard, and wives should know their place. Grant glanced at his watch. Time's up. He walked to the front door and threw it open. A blast of wind, carrying snow and ice, burst into the foyer, instantly chilling the air. The darkness outside seemed absolute. Out, he snarled. I grabbed the girl's hands tightly. You will never see us again, I told Grant. When you're old and all alone, you'll remember this moment. By then I'll have a son, he sneered. I won't even remember your names. He took a step forward and physically pushed me. I stumbled onto the porch, pulling the girls with me to keep them from falling. The door slammed shut behind us. The sound of the heavy deadbolt sliding into place echoed in my ears like a gunshot. We were alone. The wind hit us like a fist, howling, cutting through our coats instantly. Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets. Mom, I'm scared, Holly cried, clinging to my arm. Where are we going? To the car! I yelled over the wind. We'll get in the car. We trudged through the driveway to where my SUV was parked. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, my fingers already numb. I pressed the unlock button. Nothing. I pressed it again. The lights didn't flash. The doors didn't unlock. I tried the key manually in the lock. It turned, but the engine wouldn't even try to start. The car was dead. Then my phone vibrated. A text from Grant. Company car. I disabled it remotely. If you try to move it, it'll be reported stolen. Start walking. I let out a scream of pure, helpless fury into the raging wind. He had thought of everything. He wanted to break me completely. He wanted me to beg on my knees. Mom, Hazel was crying now too. My feet hurt. I looked at them. We couldn't stay here. We would freeze to death on his driveway, and in the morning, he would probably just step over our frozen bodies to get the newspaper. Come on, I said, grabbing the suitcases. We have to get to the main road. We can catch a cab or an Uber there. We walked. The snow was knee-deep in places. Just getting to the estate gates took us 20 minutes. By the time we reached the public road, we were shaking violently from the cold. I pulled out my phone to order an Uber. Account suspended. I tried to open my banking app. Card declined. He had frozen our joint accounts, reported the cards as lost or stolen. I had exactly a $20 bill in my pocket and a phone that was rapidly losing battery in the cold. I looked at my daughters. Their lips were turning blue. Snow clung to their eyelashes. We were homeless, penniless, and invisible in the middle of a blizzard. It's going to be okay, I lied, my teeth chattering. I see a bus shelter. Just up ahead. We'll take cover there. We huddled together inside the glass bus stop structure. It offered almost no protection from the biting, icy wind. I wrapped my coat around both of them, leaving myself exposed to the sleet. I held them close, rubbing their backs and whispering prayers I wasn't sure I still believed in. That night, huddled in the dark, watching the snow bury the world, something inside me died. The Meredith who always wanted to please everyone. The Meredith who was always seeking approval, the gentle architect she froze to death at that bus stop. And in her place, something else began to form. Something cold, something hard, something that could survive anything. The bus didn't come for an hour. When it finally emerged from the blizzard, its headlights cutting through the swirling snow like yellow eyes, I felt such a powerful wave of relief that my head swam. I used my last crumpled bill to pay the fare. The driver, a tired man with a graying beard, looked at our expensive coats and designer luggage, then at our blue lips and terrified eyes. He didn't ask any questions, just nodded and turned the heat up to full blast. We rode it all the way downtown. I didn't know where to go. The suburbs now felt like enemy territory. We got off near the central station. The city looked like a ghost town. Empty streets glistened with ice, and holiday decorations flickered mockingly in the windows of closed shops. We found a 2-4-hour diner that smelled of stale coffee and old grease. I ordered a single tea and asked for 2 cups of hot water, pretending we were waiting for someone. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with a name tag that read Brenda, looked at the girls shivering in the booth and, without a word, brought us 3 hot chocolates and a plate of fries. On the house, Han, she whispered, setting down the steaming mugs. Looks like you've had a hell of a night. I couldn't say anything. If I opened my mouth, I would start sobbing. And if I started crying, I would never stop. I just nodded, clutching the warm mug, letting the heat slowly return to my frozen fingers. Holly and Hazel devoured the fries as if they hadn't eaten in days. Watching them eat, seeing the dark circles under their eyes, I felt a hot, rising anger begin to replace the icy fear in my chest. Grant was probably sitting by his fire right now, sipping his whiskey and laughing with his parents about how efficiently he'd taken out the trash. He thought he had won. He thought we would just disappear, dissolve into poverty and oblivion. I looked out the diner window. Through the thick curtain of snow, I could make out the silhouettes of the city's skyscrapers. And there, rising proudly against the dark clouds, stood Centurion Tower. It was a 50-story residential building I had designed 4 years ago. It was sleek, modern, with a unique glass arch that caught the first rays of sunlight at dawn. It had won a slew of awards. Grant had accepted the Developer of the Year trophy for it. He had stood on stage holding the award while I sat in the audience, clapping until my hands hurt, so proud of his success. He was living in the penthouse of that very building. The building I had created. He was safe and warm inside the walls of my own imagination, while I sat in a cheap diner with a few dollars to my name, wondering where my children would sleep. The irony tasted like bile. "Mom," Holly whispered, dipping a fry into her hot chocolate. "Are we poor now?" I looked at her. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "We're just starting over. This is just temporary." "But Dad said we were useless," Hazel added quietly, staring into her mug. "He said girls can't do anything." I reached across the table and lifted her chin so she had to look me in the eye. "Listen to me very carefully. Your father is a fool. He looks at the world through a keyhole and thinks it's the whole sky. You are not useless. You are brilliant, you are strong, and we are going to prove it to him." We sat in the diner until the manager started giving us pointed looks, making it clear we had overstayed our welcome. It was 3 a.m. I found the only cheap motel in the area on an app that allowed cash payments on site. It was a seedy place on the outskirts of town, the kind that rents rooms by the hour. It meant another bus ride and a long walk to get there. The room smelled of cigarettes and mildew. The carpet was sticky. There was a stain on the ceiling that looked suspiciously like old blood. I pushed the heavy dresser in front of the door and checked the lock on the window 3 times. I put the girls on the only bed, using my coat as an extra blanket. I sat in the worn-out armchair by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grant's face. I pulled a small notebook from my purse. It was the only sketchbook I'd managed to save from my study. I opened it to a clean page. "I swear," I wrote, the pen digging deep into the paper, "that I will take back what is mine. I will not just survive. I will build an empire so powerful and so tall that Grant will have to crane his neck to even see me. He wanted a legacy? I'll give him a legacy. I will become his competition. I will become his nightmare." I looked at the sentence. It sounded ridiculous. I was a homeless mother in a grimy motel room, and Grant was a multimillionaire. But as I stared at the words, I remembered Centurion Tower. I remembered all the structural calculations and load-bearing equations. I remembered the complex legal loopholes I had navigated for the zoning plans. I knew his business better than he did. He was just the face, I was the brain. He had cut off his own head and thought he could still walk. I spent the rest of the night sketching a plan not for a building, but for a new life. Step 1. Survive. Step 2. Get hired. Step 3. Retribution. Morning came with a gray, unwelcome light. My phone beeped, down to 5% battery, but there was one notification on the screen. An email from the firm Vance & Partners, Preston Vance. Grant's main rival, the only developer in the city who could match him in scale. Rumor in the industry was that they hated each other over a failed contract a decade ago. I stared at the screen. Grant had blacklisted me throughout the industry. None of our old acquaintances would dare hire me. But an enemy's enemy might be very interested in acquiring a powerful weapon, and I was a loaded gun. I used the last remnants of my battery to look up the address of Preston Vance's headquarters. It was a long shot, an act of sheer desperation, but it was all I had left. "Get up, girls," I said, pushing myself to my feet and buttoning my coat. "We're going to a job interview." The journey to the financial district was an ordeal. The snow had stopped, but the wind chill made it feel like it was well below zero. The sidewalks had turned into treacherous ice rinks. We dragged our suitcases through the dirty slush, 3 bedraggled figures in worn coats, invisible to the professionals rushing to work in their warm wool and sleek leather. Holly and Hazel were exhausted. They didn't complain, but I could see the effort in every step they took. With every shiver that racked their small bodies, a wave of crushing guilt washed over me. I felt I had failed them completely. If this didn't work, our next stop would be a homeless shelter. Preston Vance's office was in a gleaming obsidian-black tower that loomed over the city like a fortress. The building was intimidating, austere, and unapproachable. When we finally reached the lobby, a wave of heat hit us. It was so intense, it was painful. My frozen skin began to sting and throb as blood rushed to the surface. The security guard at the desk looked up and scanned our appearance. The large suitcases, the soaked boots leaving dirty puddles on the marble floor. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone making it clear he'd rather throw us out. "I'd like to see Mr. Vance," I said, trying to summon the same authority I had when I managed large construction sites. "My name is Meredith. Meredith Sterling." I used my maiden name. I wanted nothing more to do with Grant. The guard smirked. "Do you have an appointment, Miss Sterling?" "No, but Mr. Vance doesn't take unscheduled appointments. And certainly not." He gestured vaguely at our luggage. "Please leave before I have to call the police." "You don't understand," I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. "I have crucial information about his main competitor. Just please, notify him." "Ma'am, we're leaving now." The guard stood up, his hand moving toward his belt. I felt the room start to spin. The lack of food, the sleepless night, the immense stress, it all crashed down on me at once. My vision blurred. The edges of the world turned black. "Mom!" I heard Hazel cry out. My knees hit the hard marble. I didn't completely lose consciousness, but I couldn't stay on my feet. I was kneeling on the floor, gasping for air, clutching my chest. The girls knelt beside me, sobbing. "Get them out of here!" the guard yelled into his radio. "We have an incident with some homeless people in the main lobby." At that moment, the elevator doors opened with a quiet chime. A sharp, commanding voice cut through the chaos. "What is going on here?" The guard froze. "Mr. Vance, I'm so sorry. It's just some vagrants. I'm getting them out now." I lifted my head with difficulty. Through the fog in my eyes, I saw a man standing there. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He had impeccably styled salt and pepper hair, and eyes that were sharp, intelligent, and slightly narrowed with irritation. Preston Vance looked at the guard, then his gaze shifted to us. His eyes swept over the girls and finally landed on my face. He paused for a moment. He wasn't looking at my dirty coat or my disheveled hair. He was looking right at my face. He narrowed his eyes, as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. Then he took a step closer. He crouched down, completely unconcerned that the dirty slush on the floor was ruining his expensive Italian shoes. "I know you," he said quietly. His voice was deep and resonant. I tried to speak, but my throat was completely dry. "You were at last year's gala," he said, his mind working at high speed. "You were standing in the back, behind Grant, but wait." He looked at my hands, calloused from hours of drafting, still faintly smudged with ink. Centurion Tower. The atrium design. The initials on the corner of the original planning submission were MS. I saw them when the city made the plans public. He looked deep into my eyes. "You're the architect, aren't you?" "Not Grant." "You." I nodded, tears of pure relief streaming down my face. "Yes, I drew them. All of them." Preston stood up abruptly, turning to the guard, his face a thundercloud. "Do you have any idea who this is?" "No, sir." This is the most talented architect in this city," Preston boomed. "Get those suitcases immediately." He turned back to me and extended a hand. It was a strong, warm hand. "Can you stand?" "I think so," I whispered. I took his hand, and he pulled me up effortlessly. He looked at Holly and Hazel, who were staring at him with wide, fearful eyes. "Are you girls hungry?" he asked them, his voice instantly softening. "Yes," Holly whispered. "Let's go upstairs," Preston said. "My assistant will order breakfast. Anything you want. Pancakes, waffles, omelets." "Why?" I asked, leaning against the reception desk to keep my balance. "Why are you helping us? You hate Grant." Preston looked at me, and for a brief moment, the mask of the ruthless businessman fell away. I saw a deep, old sadness in his eyes. "I hate Grant because he's a common thief and a liar," Preston said. "But I have immense respect for real talent. And I never leave children out in the cold. I see a lot of things, Meredith. And right now, I see an opportunity. Did Grant throw you out?" "Yes," I answered. "Last night." "Then he's an even bigger idiot than I thought," Preston said, a grim smile on his lips. "Come with me. Let's talk about how we're going to make him regret it." We followed him into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing us off from the cold, unwelcoming lobby. As the elevator glided upward, rising higher and higher above the city, I felt the first genuine spark of hope. I hadn't just been saved. I had just gained a powerful ally. Preston's office was stunning. It was nothing like Grant's, which was cluttered with trophies and photos of himself shaking hands with politicians. Preston's space was minimalist, open, with floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a place for real work, not a shrine to one's own ego. He settled the girls in a comfortable waiting area with his secretary, Sarah, a warm woman who immediately arranged for hot cocoa and a menu from the best restaurant in the building. Once I was sure they were safe and eating, I followed Preston into his private office. He poured me a glass of water, forgoing coffee. "You look severely dehydrated," he noted. I accepted the glass, my hands finally ceasing to tremble. "Thank you." He sat behind his desk, steepling his fingers. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Tell me everything. Legally, did you sign any kind of non-compete agreement?" "I didn't sign anything related to employment," I answered, feeling my professional instincts return. "Technically, I was never an employee. I was an external consultant paid through the household budget to avoid payroll taxes." Grant thought he was being clever and saving money. Preston let out a deep, genuine laugh. His own stinginess will be his downfall. "So, you're a free agent. The intellectual property rights belong to you?" "The finished drawings for Centurion are legally his," I admitted. "But all the ideas, the style, the engineering knowledge for the Lakeview Spire project, that's all up here." I tapped my temple. "I know every flaw in his current permit application. I know exactly where he's cutting corners on materials to fund his lifestyle. I know the weak points in his foundations, both literal and metaphorical." Preston leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "I'm listening. I need a job," I said directly. "I'm not looking for a handout, Mr. Vance. I need a salary and a good one. I have to support 2 daughters, pay for lawyers to get my share, and rebuild my life from scratch. In return, I'll give you a tower design that will completely eclipse his Lakeview Spire. I have a design I've been working on in secret. It's light years better than anything Grant has ever put his name on." "And Grant?" Preston asked. "What happens to him?" "I want to crush him," I said, honestly and without hesitation. "I want him to look out his window every morning and see my building blocking his sun. I want him to know that the useless woman he threw out into the cold is the reason for his complete and utter downfall." Preston stared at me for a long moment, then opened a drawer and pulled out a checkbook. "I'm giving you a $50,000 signing bonus," he said, writing as he spoke, "for a new apartment, clothes, and getting the girls back in school. Your starting salary will be $200,000 a year, plus a significant commission on every finalized project. You start today. We have a corporate guest apartment in this building you can use until you find your own place." I stared at the check he slid across the desk. It was more money than I had ever had at my own disposal. Grant had given me an allowance, but then meticulously audited every single receipt. "Why?" I asked again. "This is a risk for you. I'm a liability. He'll sue." "Let him sue," Preston shrugged. "I have better lawyers. And, Meredith," he paused, his expression softening. "5 years ago, I lost my wife and son in a car accident. Drunk driver." I covered my mouth. I had no idea. "I'm so sorry. I built this empire for them," he said, looking out the window at the gray sky. "When they were gone, I wanted to burn it all down. I know what it's like to have your family brutally taken from you in an instant. I know what it's like to be left with nothing but ghosts. Grant threw away something I would give every penny I have to get back. He doesn't deserve you, and he certainly doesn't deserve those wonderful children." He looked at me again, his gaze determined. "We're going to crush him, Meredith. Not just for business, for principle." I took the check. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. "Where do I set up?" I asked. "Right next to me," Preston replied. "We're partners now." That afternoon, I didn't rest. I went shopping, but not for pleasure. I was looking for armor. I bought a perfectly tailored black power suit. I bought proper warm winter coats for the girls. I secured a cozy apartment near the office. When I looked in the mirror that evening, the exhausted, terrified woman from the bus stop was gone. In her place was someone new. Someone dangerous. I called the best divorce attorney in the city, a real shark named Jessica Pearson. "I want to file for divorce," I told her, "and I want full custody. And Jessica? I have hard evidence of his tax fraud." The war had officially begun. And for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't fighting with my hands tied behind my back. I had a powerful shield in Preston Vance and a sword of truth in my hand. The first year passed in a blur of caffeine, graphite, and concrete. I threw myself into work with a determination that sometimes frightened even me. I wasn't just working to pay the bills. I was working to erase Grant from my soul. Preston kept his word. He made me chief architect at Vance and Partners and gave me my own team. For the first time in my life, when I spoke in meetings, men didn't interrupt me, they took notes. We launched Project Aurora. It was the secret design I had been hiding from Grant, a spiraling tower of glass and eco-friendly steel that harnessed wind power to sustain itself. It was revolutionary. We bid for the same plot of land Grant wanted for his Lakeview Spire expansion. Grant's presentation was slick, full of buzzwords. Mine was technical, passionate, and visionary. I stood before the City Planning Commission in my black suit, my hair cut into a sharp bob. Grant sat in the back of the room. When I took the podium, he jumped up, shouting that I was a fraud and that this was his intellectual property. Preston's lawyers silenced him in seconds. Miss Sterling created this design 3 months after leaving your firm, Mr. Sterling. Please sit down, or you will be removed. Grant sat, seething. I presented my proposal, looking the commission members in the eye. I answered every engineering question they threw at me, questions Grant would have had to ask me for the answers to. We won the contract. The celebratory champagne tasted like nectar. Grant's company stock dropped 10% the next day. It was a small wound. But first, blood had been drawn. But the real transformation wasn't happening in the boardroom. It was happening at home. I moved us into a beautiful apartment overlooking the park. Holly and Hazel started at a new school. Free from Grant's constant pressure and criticism. Sit up straight, don't eat that, you'll get fat, why aren't you studying? The girls blossomed. Holly joined the robotics club and stopped hiding her math notebooks. Mom, she told me one night, her eyes shining, I want to be an engineer, like you. Hazel started playing the cello with a passion that filled our home with music, erasing the oppressive silence Grant had always enforced. And Preston became a fixture in our lives. At first, it was purely professional dinners to discuss blueprints. But soon, the strategy sessions turned into game nights with the girls. He taught Holly how to throw a baseball. He would listen for hours as Hazel practiced her cello, his eyes closed, a look of quiet sadness on his face. He never tried to be their father. He was just there. A steady, supportive presence. A mountain shielding us from the wind. I remember one evening, about 8 months in. We were reviewing contracts on my living room floor. The girls were asleep. You're smiling, Preston noted, looking up from a document. Am I? I touched my face. You used to look like you were always waiting for a bomb to go off, he said gently. Now you look free. I feel free, I admitted. I never realized how heavy those chains were until they were gone. Grant made me feel small so he could feel big. He was afraid of you, Preston said. He knew you were the magic in the equation. He tried to keep you in a bottle, but you can't trap lightning, Meredith. Our eyes met. There was a sudden tension in the air, an awareness of the quiet room, of our proximity. My heart beat faster, but I pulled back. I wasn't ready. The wounds were still too fresh. Preston seemed to understand. He just gave a sad, patient smile and went back to the documents. Meanwhile, Grant was spiraling. The news trickled in through various channels. Tiffany, his former mistress and now fiancée, was spending money faster than he could make it. She demanded luxury vacations, a new car every month, and costly renovations to the mansion. Desperate to keep his prize, Grant indulged her every whim. He started cutting costs on his construction sites to pay for her lifestyle, cheaper concrete, non-union labor. I documented everything, every whisper, every rumor. I was building a dossier. But Grant wasn't done with me. He couldn't stand that I was succeeding. He couldn't stand that I was happy. One November evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall almost exactly a year since he'd thrown me out, a courier knocked on my door. He handed me a thick envelope, a legal summons. I opened it. It was a lawsuit. Grant Sterling versus Meredith Sterling. Petition for full custody. The blood froze in my veins. He didn't want the children. He had called them useless. So, why? I read the justification. The mother is an unfit parent. She works excessive hours, provides an unstable living environment, and is cohabitating with the father's primary business rival, exposing the children to corporate espionage. He was using the girls to hit me. He knew they were the one thing whose loss could destroy me. The papers fell from my hands. The floor tilted beneath me again. Preston, I whispered, grabbing my phone. He's trying to take them from me. The courtroom was sterile, smelling of lemon polish and fear. I sat on the left, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. Preston sat in the gallery behind me, a silent guardian. Grant sat on the right, looking confident in his three-piece suit, with Tiffany clinging to his arm like an expensive ornament. Grant's lawyer, a man known as the Butcher, began to pace before the judge. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here to rescue two innocent children from a chaotic and neglectful environment. Miss Sterling works 80-hour weeks. She drags these children to construction sites. She is clearly putting her newfound career ahead of her maternal duties." He displayed photos on a screen me in the office late at night, the girls eating pizza from a box. They had been following me. "Mr. Sterling," the lawyer continued, gesturing to Grant, "is a pillar of the community. He has a stable home, the family estate where these children were raised. He has a fiancée who is ready to dedicate her life to being a full-time stepmother. He can provide stability, tradition, and proper values." Bile rose in my throat. Tiffany, a full-time mother? She was looking at Holly and Hazel with open disdain, examining her nails as the lawyer spoke. Then it was my turn. My lawyer Jessica stood up. She was petite, sharp, and utterly terrifying. "Your Honor, let's talk about stability," Jessica said. "Let's talk about the night of December 24th of last year. The night Mr. Sterling threw his own children out into a blizzard." "Objection," Grant's lawyer roared. "Baseless and unsubstantiated claims." "I have the official meteorological reports," Jessica countered calmly. "I have a time-stamped text message where Mr. Sterling informs my client he has remotely disabled the family car. I also have a statement from the city bus driver who picked them up from a bus stop with signs of hypothermia." The judge, a stern woman with glasses, looked over them at Grant. "Objection overruled. Continue." Jessica laid out the facts. Financial abuse, psychological abuse, verbal abuse. But Grant had prepared well. He brought witnesses his parents, his golf buddies who all swore he was a loving father, and I was a hysterical, ambitious woman who left of her own accord. It was a he said, she said battle, and Grant had the money to pay for experts who argued that a traditional two-parent home, him and Tiffany, was a better environment than a single working mother. During a recess, Grant cornered me by the water cooler. "Give it up, Meredith," he hissed. "You know I don't even want them. They're annoying. But I know how much you care about them. So here's the deal. You pull out of the Aurora project. You drop your bid for the city stadium. You publicly admit you stole my designs, and I'll let you keep the brats." I stared at him. The mask was completely off. He was using our own flesh and blood as a bargaining chip for a construction contract. "You're a monster," I whispered. "I'm a businessman," he sneered. "The clock is ticking, Meredith. The judge looks like she's leaning my way. Do you really want Tiffany raising them? She hates kids. She might forget to feed them." A cold, deadly rage, stronger than anything I had ever felt, solidified in my chest. I pulled my phone from my pocket. "Did you get that?" I asked loudly. From behind a nearby pillar, Preston stepped out. He held up his own smartphone. Every single word. Grant's face went white. "That's illegal. You can't record someone without their consent." "Actually," Preston said, stepping closer to tower over Grant, "the law makes an exception when you're recording evidence of a crime. And blackmail, Grant, is a crime." We went back into the courtroom. Jessica immediately requested a private meeting in the judge's chambers. We played the recording. When we returned to the main courtroom, the judge's face was stone. "Mr. Bides, Sterling," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade, "I have heard enough. Not only am I denying your petition for custody, I am granting Miss Sterling's request for a permanent restraining order. You are to have no contact with your children until they are 18, unless they themselves initiate it. Furthermore, I am ordering you to pay full child support, retroactive to the night you threw them out of their home." Grant slammed his fist on the table. "This is a setup. You're biased." "One more word, and I'll have you held in contempt of court," the judge warned. "This court is adjourned." Grant stormed out, Tiffany trailing behind him, looking furious not because they'd lost the children, but because she knew the child support payments would cut into her shopping budget. I hugged the girls tightly, and we all cried with relief, right there in the courtroom. It was over. They were mine. They were safe. Preston stood in the back, smiling warmly. He didn't intrude on the moment. He just watched, his job done. That night, after the girls were asleep, Preston and I sat on the balcony, drinking wine and watching the city lights. "You saved us today," I said. "You saved yourself." Preston shook his head. "I just held the phone. You were the one who stood up to him." He turned to face me, the moonlight catching the silver in his hair. Meredith, watching you these past 2 years, watching you fight, watching you build, I've never seen anything like it. He took my hand. This time, I didn't pull away. I know you're still healing, he said quietly. But I want you to know, I'm not going anywhere. I'm all in. For Aurora, for the girls, for you. I looked at this strong, good, patient man who had literally picked us up off the floor, and I realized the ice around my heart had finally, completely melted. I know, I whispered. He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of fireworks. It was a kiss of shelter. Solid, warm, and safe. But even as I was finding my happiness, Grant was already plotting his final desperate move. He had lost the business battle. He had lost the court battle. Now, he was going to destroy my reputation, and he was convinced he held the ultimate trump card, Tiffany's belly. Or so he thought. The wedding invitation arrived 6 months later, and that brings us back to the jet, the lawn, and the thick paper envelope in my hand. Are you ready to find out what was inside? While I was building a fortress of love and success with Preston and my daughters, Grant's life was slowly turning into a Greek tragedy, one where the hero's fatal flaw destroys everything he has. Except Grant was no hero. He was just a man consumed by a sick obsession. Thanks to a private investigator Preston had hired to ensure our safety, I knew exactly what was happening behind the closed doors of my former home. And frankly, it was pathetic. Grant was hemorrhaging money. The divorce settlement, despite his efforts to hide assets, had been huge. The retroactive, high-figure child support payments were draining his cash flow, but instead of tightening his belt, he spent even more to keep up appearances. He was terrified that if people saw him cutting back, they'd see him as weak. And then there was Tiffany. She wasn't just a trophy fiancé, she was a predator who had smelled blood in the water. She knew how desperately Grant wanted a son, and she played him like a cheap fiddle. About 3 months after our custody hearing, Tiffany introduced a new player, a man named Lance. He's my cousin, she told Grant one night over dinner. A real financial wizard. Ran hedge funds in New York and London. He can help you solve your cash flow problems in a heartbeat, darling. Grant, whose paranoia usually made him trust no one, welcomed Lance with open arms. Why? Because Tiffany kept whispering in his ear that he was family. And unlike the professional accountants who kept telling Grant to stop spending, Lance told him exactly what he wanted to hear. Lance was slick. He wore shiny suits and threw around complex financial jargon. Grant fired his longtime CFO, a loyal man who had worked with his father for 30 years, and installed Lance as the new head of finance. It was like inviting a wolf to guard the sheep. Within weeks, Lance and Tiffany began their operation. They set up shell corporations. They submitted fake invoices for building materials that were never delivered. They siphoned millions of dollars out of Grant's company, right under his nose. But Grant was too busy, too blinded by Tiffany's greatest performance. One evening, Tiffany came home holding an ultrasound picture. She sat Grant down in the same living room where he'd called me useless and handed him the black and white photo. It's a boy, she lied without blinking. In reality, she hadn't even been to a doctor. She'd bought the image online for a few dollars. Grant wept with joy. The investigator later told us that neighbors heard him shouting with happiness. A son, a king. He was so blinded by his own ego, so desperate to prove his masculinity and secure his legacy, that he never thought to ask for a paternity test. He never insisted on going to a doctor's appointment with her. He just handed her his black credit card with no limit and told her to prepare the perfect nursery. Buy the best of everything, he told her. A gold-plated crib from Italy. Silk everything. I want the world to know my heir is coming. Tiffany and Lance went on a shopping spree that would put A-list celebrities to shame. But they weren't buying baby clothes. They were buying diamonds, luxury watches, and transferring cash to offshore accounts. At the office, Grant became unbearable. He strutted around construction sites like a peacock. He called his competitors just to brag. He even tried calling Preston. I hear you're raising my daughters, Grant sneered into the phone. Fine, enjoy them. I've got a real heir on the way. A son. The sterling name will never die. Preston put the call on speaker so I could hear. He didn't get angry. He just looked at me and winked. Congratulations, Grant, Preston said calmly. I certainly hope he takes after his mother. It would be a shame if he inherited your business sense. Grant hung up in a rage. I felt a sudden, surprising pang of pity for him. He was destroying himself. He was being robbed blind by the woman he'd left his family for, celebrating a child that didn't exist. It was a house of cards built on a foundation of lies, and the wind was picking up. Should we tell him? I asked Preston that night. About Lance, about the money? Preston swirled the wine in his glass, looking thoughtful. If you tell him now, he won't believe you. He'll think you're just jealous, a bitter ex-wife trying to sabotage his happiness. No, Meredith. Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake. We wait. We let him dig a hole so deep he can never climb out. That seems cruel, I admitted quietly. Cruel was throwing a 13-year-old girl out into a blizzard, Preston said, his voice hard. This is just karma. Besides, we need him distracted. The Aurora Tower is almost finished. The grand opening is in 6 months. Let him focus on his imaginary prince while we build a real kingdom. So we watched. We watched as Grant took out another loan to cover the spiraling costs Lance was generating. We watched as he mortgaged the family estate, the house my children grew up in, for more cash. He was betting everything on this future son, not knowing the only thing Tiffany was pregnant with was a plan to leave him destitute. And while Grant was chasing a phantom, I was about to experience something that would change my life forever. But unlike Grant's delusion, my surprise was very, very real. Exactly 2 years had passed since the night I was thrown out. The painful anniversary, Christmas Eve, was approaching. For weeks, I had felt a heavy shadow on my heart. The body remembers trauma, even when the mind tries to move on. When the snow started to fall in the city, I found myself constantly checking the weather apps, terrified of another blizzard, even though I was safe in a warm, luxury penthouse. Preston noticed. He didn't say anything, but he started coming home from work earlier. He filled our apartment with fresh flowers to combat the grayness outside. On Christmas Eve morning, Preston told me to pack a bag. Where are we going? I asked, looking at the falling snow with distrust. Somewhere safe, he promised warmly. Trust me. He took me and the girls far out of the city, not to a hotel, but to a private cabin he owned in the Adirondacks. It wasn't a huge, oppressive mansion like Grant's estate. It was a beautiful log home, warm, cozy, smelling of pine and cedar. There was a massive fireplace, but unlike the one Grant had used to burn my dreams, this one held a cheerful, welcoming fire. We're going to overwrite the bad memories, Preston told me as we unpacked. December 24th will no longer be the day you lost everything. From now on, it's the day we celebrate everything we've found. We spent the day sledding with Holly and Hazel. For the first time, the girls saw snow as fun, not danger. We built a huge snowman and had a snowball fight where Preston let Hazel tackle him into a deep drift. That evening, we cooked a delicious dinner together. No staff, just us, making homemade food and laughing until our sides hurt. The girls went to bed exhausted and happy, their cheeks rosy from the cold. After they were asleep, Preston asked me to join him on the deck. He had set up a heat lamp and wrapped us in thick wool blankets. We sat on a hanging bench, watching the snowflakes fall gently in the moonlight. The silence was deep and peaceful, not threatening. Meredith, Preston said quietly, taking my hand. I heard a slight tremor in his voice that I wasn't used to. 2 years ago, I found you on the floor of my lobby. You were broken. You were terrified. I whispered, leaning my head on his shoulder. I thought my life was over. And look at you now, he said, turning to face me. You're the lead architect on the biggest development in the country. You're a mother who fought like a lioness for her cubs and won. You're the strongest woman I have ever known. He reached into his pocket. My breath caught. I didn't buy this ring in a store, he said, pulling out a small velvet box. I designed it myself and had a jeweler, a real one, not the knockoff Grant deals with custom make it. He opened the box. Inside wasn't a traditional diamond. It was a stunning, deep sapphire. A cornflower blue sapphire, surrounded by smaller diamonds that formed the subtle shape of an architect's compass. Blue, he said softly. The color he forbade you to wear. The color of your freedom. The color of the sky you looked up at when you decided to fight back. Tears filled my eyes hot, clean tears of pure happiness. Meredith Sterling, Preston said, sliding off the bench to kneel on the snow-dusted deck. He didn't care about the cold or his expensive pants. He looked up at me with absolute, boundless devotion. I don't want to own you. I don't want to control you. I just want to walk beside you for the rest of my life. I want to be the foundation under your feet when the world shakes. I want to be the father Holly and Hazel deserve. Will you marry me? I looked at him. I looked at the snow falling around us, the same snow that was once my enemy now felt like glittering confetti celebrating this moment. Yes, I choked out through my tears. Yes, Preston. 1,000 times, yes. He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. He stood and pulled me into a kiss that finally melted the last vestiges of ice from the bottom of my soul. I have one condition, I said, pulling back slightly, laughing through my tears. Name it, he smiled. We don't tell the world. Not yet. I want this happiness to be just ours for a little while. Ours and the girls. Done, he agreed. But I'm warning you. When we do announce it, we're going to do it with a bang. Oh, it'll be a bang, all right, I promised, smiling. I have a feeling this year has more surprises in store. I had no idea how right I was. The universe has a strange sense of humor. Grant had so desperately wanted a son that he'd destroyed his family. At this very moment, he was buying a golden crib for an imaginary child. But inside me, on that deck, a new life was already beginning. 2 new lives, actually. Because while Grant was chasing a lie, I was carrying the truth. And the ultimate irony of it all was about to become the biggest, most satisfying joke in the entire city. January brought a wave of bitter cold to the city, but I was glowing. I was constantly tired, had a ferocious appetite for pickles and peanut butter, and felt a strange, delicate fluttering in my stomach. I was convinced it was just stress from the upcoming grand opening of the Aurora Tower, but Preston insisted I see a doctor. Dr. Evans, a warm woman with kind hands, performed the ultrasound. Preston stood beside me, clutching my hand, looking terrified that I was seriously ill. Well, Dr. Evans said, smiling from behind her mask. I see the problem. What is it? Preston asked, his grip tightening. Is it a tumor? Dr. Evans chuckled. Not at all, Mr. Vance. That's a heartbeat. Actually, hold on. She moved the wand across my belly. I see 2 heartbeats. Silence. The only sound was the hum of the machine, which suddenly seemed amplified. I'm pregnant? I whispered in disbelief. But I'm 41. We weren't even trying. Life finds a way, Dr. Evans winked. And judging by this, do you want to know the gender? I can tell from the blood work we did. Preston looked at me. Do you want to know? Yes, I answered without hesitation. Tell us. Well, Meredith, the doctor smiled widely. You're about to be outnumbered in this house. It's 2 boys, identical twins. 2 boys. At that moment, I burst out crying. But it wasn't tears of sadness. It was hysterical, overwhelming laughter. I laughed until I cried, then I sobbed, then I laughed again. Preston hugged me tight, burying his face in my neck, his shoulders shaking with emotion. He had lost a son years ago, and now fate was giving him 2. Boys, Preston whispered, kissing my forehead. We're going to have sons. The cosmic justice of it all was staggering. Grant had thrown me out, claiming my genetics were garbage because I couldn't produce a male heir. And now I was carrying 2 healthy sons with the man who loved me for my mind, not my womb. We went home in a state of blissful shock. We told Holly and Hazel that evening. The girls shrieked with delight, immediately arguing over names and who would get to teach their new brothers how to throw a ball first. But the universe wasn't done with its jokes. 2 days later, a courier arrived at my office. He handed me a heavy, cream-colored envelope with elegant, embossed gold letters. It was a wedding invitation. Mr. Grant Sterling and Miss Tiffany Miller request the honor of your presence at their marriage ceremony. Inside was a handwritten note from Grant. The writing was sloppy, rushed. Meredith, I know we have our differences, but for the sake of the girls, I think it's time we buried the hatchet. I want Holly and Hazel to be flower girls, and I want you there to witness the beginning of my new dynasty. Tiffany is expecting my heir. It's a boy. I want you to see what a real perfect family looks like. Don't make a scene. Just come, pay your respects, and maybe I'll reconsider the child support issue I'm fighting in court. Grant. I read the letter twice. The audacity was breathtaking. He wasn't inviting me for peace. He was inviting me for humiliation. He wanted me to sit in the back row, the discarded, barren ex-wife, and watch him marry his younger, fertile mistress. He wanted to parade his new heir in front of me. He needed my presence to validate his happiness and prove to his investors that he wasn't a monster, but a magnanimous patriarch. A hot, violent anger flared in my chest. I'm not going, I told Preston, throwing the invitation on his desk. He just wants to gloat. He wants to show off his fraudulent life. Preston picked up the invitation, read it carefully, and a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a shark that had just scented blood. "Oh no," he said quietly. "You're going. We're all going." Why would I give him the satisfaction? "Because," Preston said, tapping the stiff card against his hand, "we have the full dossier. We know about the embezzlement. We know about the fake pregnancy. My P.I. confirmed Tiffany bought a silicone pregnancy belly online last week. And we know that Grant is, for all legal purposes, bankrupt. He's living on loans to finance this wedding." He got up from his desk, came over to me, and placed his hands gently on my shoulders, mindful of my slightly rounding belly. "Meredith, he invited you to a show. So let's give him a performance he will never forget. He wants to talk about heirs? Let's show him yours. He wants to talk about wealth? Let's show him what real power looks like. What are you planning?" I asked, a thrill of anticipation running down my spine. "I just bought a new jet," Preston said casually. "A Gulfstream G650. It's being delivered next week, and I bought something else." "What? All of Grant's debt?" Preston smiled widely. His bank was desperate to offload the toxic, non-performing loans. "I bought every last penny of it this morning through one of my shell companies. Legally speaking, Meredith, I own him. I own his house, I own his company, I even own the chair he's sitting on." My jaw dropped. "You bought his debt?" "Every cent," Preston grinned. "I can start foreclosure proceedings at any time, but I'm thinking his wedding day is the perfect time to call in the debt, don't you?" I looked at the invitation again. "Witness the beginning of my new dynasty." "Yes," I said, a matching predatory smile on my lips. "Let's go to a wedding. I just need to find the right dress." "Blue," Preston agreed. "Cornflower blue, the color of a true queen." The weeks leading up to the ceremony weren't like wedding preparations. They were like planning a coup. Our apartment became a war room. On one side of the living room was the baby zone fabric swatches for the nursery, lists of names, we liked Ethan and Liam, and vitamin schedules. On the other side was the demolition zone. Preston's legal team laid out the plan. "Grant is a facade," a lawyer explained, pointing to charts on a whiteboard. "He's borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. This wedding is costing him millions he doesn't have. He's hoping this marriage will secure him new funding from Tiffany's supposedly wealthy family, which our reports show doesn't exist. Lance is bleeding him dry. On the day of the wedding, Grant's liquidity will be at absolute zero." "And the pregnancy?" I asked, stroking my own real, though still small, belly. "A fraud," the investigator interjected. "Medical records show Tiffany had a tubal ligation 5 years ago. She's sterile." "That ultrasound picture?" "It's a stock photo from Google Images. We have the file's metadata. He's marrying a con artist, the party is financed by theft, and he's waiting for a ghost. It's almost too tragic to be funny," I summarized. "Almost," Preston added dryly. "But only almost." The plan was simple but devastating. We would arrive late, deliberately, to command everyone's attention. We would interrupt the ceremony just before the vows, technically saving Grant from legally tying himself to a fraud. A mercy, really, though it would feel like anything but. And then, we would drop the final bomb. I went for my dress fitting. I chose a designer who specialized in revenge couture. The dress was a heavy, lustrous silk in a deep, electric cornflower blue. It was modest but powerful, perfectly accentuating my figure while being cleverly draped to mask the first signs of my pregnancy. I was saving that reveal. For Holly and Hazel, we chose matching blue dresses. The girls knew the whole plan. They knew their father had lied. They knew he wanted them there as props. "We're not props, Mom," Holly said firmly, looking at her reflection. She looked so grown up. "We're the main characters." "Exactly right," I told her proudly, heads high. "You're Vance's now, in spirit. You have your own dignity." The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the nursery we were starting to put together, holding the invitation. Grant had sent another text that morning. "Make sure the girls behave and try to look presentable. Tiffany's family is high society. Don't embarrass me with some cheap chain store outfit." I laughed out loud. The dress hanging in my closet cost more than Tiffany's entire supposed dowry. Preston came in quietly with 2 cups of herbal tea. "Nervous?" "No," I answered calmly. "Ready." It feels like I'm finishing a long, dark book and opening the first chapter of the sequel. Preston kissed the top of my head. "The jet is fueled. The pilot is briefed. The official request to land at the neighboring resort was denied, but I persuaded the landowner to let us use that private strip. Money opens all doors." "You bribed him?" "I bought the resort from him," Preston shrugged. "It's a good investment. Besides, we'll need a place for our own wedding next year, won't we?" I shook my head in wonder at this man. He would move heaven and earth for me. Grant wouldn't even move a chair. Tomorrow, Preston said, looking out at the city skyline, the false king falls. And the true queen rises, I finished with a smile. The morning was bright and clear. We boarded the Gulf Stream. The interior smelled of new leather and imminent victory. As the jet climbed, leaving the city behind, I looked down at the suburbs below. Somewhere down there, Grant was putting on his tuxedo, convinced this would be the greatest day of his life. He had no idea the sky was about to fall on his head. Ladies and gentlemen, the pilot's calm voice came over the intercom. We are beginning our descent toward the Hamptons. Estimated time to the drop zone is 10 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts. It looks like the groom is in for a bumpy landing. I tightened my belt. I looked at my brilliant daughters. I looked at Preston. Showtime, I whispered. The wind from the jet engines still whipped through my hair as I stood on the platform. The silence from the crowd was suffocating. 300 pairs of eyes were fixed on me in stunned disbelief. Grant was frozen, his face a mask of shock and rage. He looked at the plane, then at me, then at the envelope in my hand. You had no right, he stammered into the microphone, which immediately let out a piercing squeal of feedback. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. You were supposed to come in the back. I don't use back entrances anymore, Grant, I replied calmly, my voice carrying clearly in the paralyzing quiet. You invited me to admire the birth of your dynasty. Well, here I am. Tiffany was the first to recover. She stepped forward, theatrically clutching her fake padded stomach. She wore a dress that was too tight and too glittery, trying to look like a fairy tale princess. Get out of here, she shrieked. This is my day, you jealous, barren hag. Security, why are you just standing there? The security guards glanced nervously at Preston. Preston just slowly adjusted his cufflinks and leveled them with a hard, icy gaze. They knew whose checks had more zeros in this town. They didn't move an inch. Jealous? I laughed, a real, uninhibited laugh. Oh, Tiffany, darling, I'm not jealous. I'm here to save you both a lot of time and money on divorce lawyers in about 6 months. I turned to the guests. I saw Grant's key investors and bank representatives. Grant invited you all here to celebrate a merger, I announced. A merger of two supposedly powerful families. A new heir, a new start. But every marriage should start with the truth, shouldn't it? Silence her, Grant roared, lunging toward me. She's insane. Preston intercepted Grant's arm in midair. He didn't hit him. He just squeezed with a steel-like grip. Let her speak, Grant. Preston said in a low, dangerous voice. Or I make one phone call to the white-collar crime detectives waiting in the parking lot. The air went out of Grant. Detectives? He choked. Pale. Fraud and embezzlement are serious crimes, Grant, Preston whispered in his ear. I opened the thick paper envelope. I pulled out the first document. It was an enlarged copy of a patient's medical chart. Fact number 1, I said, holding the paper high. Your coveted heir, the Grand Prince of the Sterling Empire. I turned the document toward Tiffany. Her face went chalk white. These are Tiffany's official medical records from St. Jude's Clinic. I read aloud for all to hear. Date of procedure, 5 years ago. Procedure, tubal ligation. Diagnosis, permanent and total inability to conceive. A loud murmur swept through the crowd. Oh my God, someone in the front row whispered. That's a lie, Tiffany shrieked, backing away. It's forged. I'm pregnant. I have the ultrasound pictures. You have stock photos from the internet, I countered, pulling another sheet from the envelope. And this is the order confirmation for the silicone pregnancy belly you bought online last Tuesday. Express shipping. Grant turned slowly to look at Tiffany. His eyes were wide with chaos, like a child waking from a nightmare. Tiffany, honey, tell me she's lying, he stammered. Tell me about our son. Tiffany began to stutter, looking around wildly for an escape route. She hacked my records. It's a conspiracy. Fact number 2, I continued without mercy, pulling out a spreadsheet. Let's talk money. Grant, did you really think you were marrying into wealth? Tiffany's cousin Lance, the financial guru? He's a con artist with warrants out for his arrest in several states. And together, they have successfully funneled $4 million from your company accounts into a shell corporation in an offshore tax haven. I threw the printouts of the bank transfers at Grant's feet. They scattered around him like twisted confetti. You're bankrupt, Grant, I said quietly. And you were robbed blind by the same woman you threw your family out into the cold for. Grant looked down at the documents. He recognized the account numbers. He recognized Lance's signature. He looked around for him. Lance was trying to slip out of the back of the wedding tent. "Lance!" Grant croaked. The man broke into a run. He knocked over a waiter and sprinted across the lawn. "Get him!" Preston shouted. Two of our security men tackled Lance before he even reached the hedge line. Chaos erupted among the guests. People were on their feet, phones out, recording, shouting. But I wasn't finished. I had one more card to play, the ace. "And finally," I said, looking Grant straight in his terrified eyes, "you think you still have a company? You think you can recover from this?" Preston stepped forward and handed me the last document from his file, a deed of ownership. "Grant Sterling," I said, my voice ringing out like a judge's verdict. 3 days ago, the final deadline for your loan payments passed, putting you in default. The bank put your debt up for sale. Do you know who bought it?" Grant just shook his head, tears streaming down his face. He looked utterly broken, so small. "We did," I said, gesturing to Preston and myself. "Vance and Partners is now the sole legal owner of Sterling Development. We own this estate. We own your office. We even own the platform you're standing on." I stepped closer, leaning in so my whisper was for his ears only. "You wanted a legacy, Grant? I am your legacy. I'm the architect who is about to level your entire life." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the specific silence that accompanies a controlled demolition, that split second after the charges detonate, but before the dust cloud rises. Grant fell to his knees. It wasn't theatrical. His legs just gave out. He knelt on the white-painted wood of the altar, surrounded by the scattered evidence of his own stupidity, betrayal, and ruin. He looked up at Tiffany. She wasn't even looking at him. She was watching the guards hold Lance, calculating her own survival. "You," he whispered to her, his voice shaking with a mixture of despair and rising fury. "You said we were having a son. You promised me a son." Tiffany sneered, the mask of the loving fiancé gone forever, revealing a face of pure greed. "Oh, grow up, Grant," she spat. "There's no son. There never was. You were just an easy mark." A desperate old man with an ego bigger than his brain. "I loved you," he whimpered. "I gave you everything." "You gave me everything because you're a textbook narcissist," she screamed, no longer caring about the audience. "You didn't love me. You loved the idea of continuing your name. You treated your wife like breeding stock, and you tried to make me your next incubator. You deserve this." She tried to flee, hiking up her dress to run for the parking lot. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Preston announced loudly. "The police have already blocked the main gate. They have arrest warrants for you and Lance for fraud and embezzlement. We submitted the full evidence packet to the prosecutor's office an hour ago." Tiffany froze. A few feet away, she collapsed into a chair and buried her face in her hands. Grant looked around. He looked at his parents in the front row. Robert and Eleanor looked faint, clinging to each other. They had enabled him for years, pushed him to find a better wife. Now they were witnessing the complete humiliation and end of their family name. Finally, Grant looked at me. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked at my dress, that cornflower blue dress. He looked at Holly and Hazel standing beside me, tall and proud. "Meredith," he choked out. "Help me. Please. I didn't know. I was deceived." "You weren't deceived when you threw us out into a blizzard," I answered, my voice cold. "You weren't deceived when you filed for custody just to hurt me. You made your choices, Grant. This isn't a conspiracy. These are the consequences." He reached a trembling hand toward me. "But the company." "My father's company. You can't just take it." "It was your company," Preston corrected him sharply. "Now it's just another asset in my portfolio. An asset that, as of this moment, will be personally managed by Meredith. She's the new CEO of Sterling Development, effective immediately." Grant's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You're giving it to her?" "She built it," Preston said simply. "She designed the buildings. She fixed your mistakes. It was always hers. I just bought the paperwork to make it official." Grant crumpled completely, pressing his forehead to the floor. He began to sob, a loud, ugly sound that echoed across the lawn. It was a pathetic sight. The man who so desperately wanted to be a king was now kneeling like a beggar at the feet of the queen he had exiled. I felt a gentle tug on my hand. It was Hazel. "Mom," she whispered. "Let's go. He's just pathetic. I don't want to watch this anymore." She was right. There was no satisfaction in watching a man self-destruct. The victory wasn't in his pain. It was in our freedom. I turned to the guests one last time. Please, enjoy the champagne, I said with a smile. It seems the groom has paid for it. Well, technically I paid for it, since I bought all his debt. So, on the house. I turned my back on Grant. I took Preston's arm. We walked back down the red carpet toward the waiting jet. But just before we climbed the stairs, I stopped. I turned to face the film crew Grant had hired to capture his triumph. I looked straight into the camera lens. Grant so desperately wanted a son to carry on his name, I said, placing a hand on my belly, finally revealing the gentle curve beneath the silk. Well, life is funny. I'm pregnant, with twins. 2 boys. And they will be raised by a real man who knows that fatherhood is about love and respect, not DNA. The collective gasp that ripped through the crowd was the last thing I heard before the jet's engines roared back to life. I saw Grant's face contort as the final realization hit him. He had lost his wife, his daughters, his company, and now he knew he had lost the very thing he'd sacrificed it all for, his sons. Only they were never his to begin with. If you're still listening to this story, please leave a like on this video and type the number 1 in the comments. Let me know you're here with me today, that you believe karma exists, and that sometimes the good guys do win. Your support means the world to me. Type a 1 now, and I'll tell you what happened after our plane took off. As the Gulfstream's door closed with a quiet hiss, sealing us in the silent luxury of the cabin, the chaos below was just beginning to unfold. Through the window, I watched the flashing blue lights of police cars surrounding the venue. Officers were cuffing Lance by the hedgerow. Tiffany was being led away, screaming and kicking, her garish dress a ridiculous contrast to the grim reality of the law. Grant was still kneeling at the altar, a lone, broken figure amidst the ruins of his own ego. "Are you okay?" Preston asked, unbuckling his seatbelt and moving to sit beside me. He poured me a glass of water. I took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline slowly leave my system. My hands were still trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what we had just done. I searched for the word, light. I feel like a massive weight has been lifted. "You were amazing, Mom," Holly exclaimed from the seat across from us. "Did you see his face when you showed him the medical records? It was priceless. And when you told him about the twins," Hazel added, laughing, "he looked like he'd swallowed a lemon." I smiled at them. "I'm glad you're happy, girls. But remember, we didn't do this to be mean. We did it to stop him from hurting anyone else, and to take back what he stole from us." "The company?" Holly asked. "Our dignity," I corrected. "And yes, the company too." The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Cleared for takeoff, Mrs. Vance." "Oh, my apologies, Miss Sterling. Force of habit." Preston looked at me and winked. "Mrs. Vance has a nice ring to it, though." As the jet climbed sharply, banking over the water, I looked down one last time. The wedding venue was just a tiny, fading dot. The drama, the shouting, the sirens, it all dissolved into the quiet hum of the engines. We were flying back to the city, but we weren't returning to the same life. Everything had changed. The fallout was immediate. The video of the confrontation, filmed by a guest, went viral. Hashtags like #GrantKarma and #The Architect Returns trended on social media. But the real earthquake was in the financial world. Preston initiated the foreclosure. That same evening, the bank seized all of Grant's assets. The locks on the Sterling Development headquarters were changed. All his accounts were frozen. Grant was released by the police after questioning he was, technically, a victim of the fraud, not a participant. But when he walked out of the station, he had nowhere to go. His car had been towed by the bank. The family estate had an eviction notice on the gate. His credit cards were all declined. He had to call his parents to pick him up. The great king was now sleeping on his parents' couch in the guest house of an estate that was no longer his. Meanwhile, Tiffany and Lance were denied bail. The evidence I had gathered was airtight. Late that night, back in our apartment, Preston and I sat in the nursery. "Well," Preston began, looking at the 2 empty cribs, "it seems we now own a large construction company." "Looks that way," I nodded. "Sterling Development has to go, though." "Agreed," he said. "Any ideas?" "Phoenix architecture." I proposed without hesitation. "Because we rose from the ashes." "Perfect," Preston kissed my hand. "And you're the CEO. I'll just be a silent partner. This is your show, Meredith." 3 days later, my assistant called. "Miss Sterling, there's a man in the lobby. He looks disheveled. He's shouting that he's your husband." "Ex-husband," I corrected calmly. "Was he on the schedule?" "No, ma'am. He's making a scene. He's here, I told Preston, who was sitting in my office. He stood immediately. Want me to handle it? I thought for a moment. I thought of the terrified woman at the bus stop. No, I said firmly, straightening the jacket over my belly. I'll handle this. I need to close this door myself. For good. I went down to the lobby. Grant looked like he had aged 20 years. He was wearing the same ruined suit from the wedding. Meredith, he cried when he saw me. Please, tell them who I am. I know exactly who you are, Grant. You're a trespasser. I'm your husband. We built this together. I didn't steal anything, I said coolly. I bought it, fair and square, with the money I earned fixing your mistakes. He slumped against the glass wall. Meredith, please. I have nothing. The bank took the house. My parents can't support me. I'm sleeping on a couch. I have $20 in my pocket. The irony was palpable. I know the feeling, I said quietly. It's cold at the bottom, isn't it? I'm so sorry, he sobbed. I was an idiot. Tiffany manipulated me. You chose to say those things, Grant, I said flatly. You only regret it because you lost. You don't regret hurting me. You regret getting caught. I'll change, he begged. Give me a job. Anything. I have to be near the business. I looked at him, trying to find a trace of the man I once loved. There was nothing left. No, I said. But human decency, Meredith. Mercy. My mercy was not pressing charges for the tax fraud schemes you were involved in, I retorted. My lawyers argued you were too incompetent to understand what was happening in your own company. That saved you from prison. That's all the mercy you get. Now leave this building. What about the girls? He tried, a last desperate gambit. You have a restraining order, I reminded him. And they saw you at the wedding, sobbing over an imaginary son while ignoring them. They want nothing to do with you, Grant. Holly said you looked like a sad clown. He flinched. I can be a good father. You had 10 years, I said. Now, leave before I have you arrested for violating a court order. I turned to walk away. Meredith, he screamed. You can't do this to me. I am Grant Sterling. I am a king. I stopped and looked back over my shoulder one last time. No, Grant, I said quietly. You're just a cautionary tale. I nodded to the security guards, who escorted him out. In the months that followed, Grant became a pariah. He was forced to declare bankruptcy. Then came the final blow. Tiffany, seeking a lighter sentence, revealed that Grant had been involved in illegal bribes years ago. Facing a new investigation and potential prison time, he fled the city. He took a bus to a distant state and ended up working as a manual laborer on a farm. The great Grant Sterling, who needed a son to take over his empire, was now shoveling manure for minimum wage. 6 months later, my belly was huge. Spring had arrived. One rainy afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was Grant on the security camera, looking thin and beaten. Go away, Grant, I said through the intercom. Meredith, he said, his voice hoarse. I didn't come to fight. I heard your due date is soon. He held up a small soaked cardboard box. I just wanted to give you this. I told him to leave it on the mat. I work in a warehouse now, he said into the camera. It's hard work. My back hurts every day. Honest work never killed anyone, Grant, I replied. I know, he sighed. I've had a lot of time to think. I was so wrong about everything. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I destroyed you. I see pictures of the girls online. They look so happy, so light. They were never that light with me. No, they weren't, I cut in. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he continued. I just wanted you to know, I'm glad you won. If I'd kept the company, I would have ruined it anyway. He placed the box on the mat. Goodbye, Meredith. Tell the girls. Tell them I'm sorry I was never the father they needed. He turned and limped away into the rain. After he was gone, I opened the door. Inside the box was a worn, old teddy bear with one eye missing. It was Holly's favorite bear from when she was a toddler, the one Grant had made me throw away years ago, calling it junk. He must have saved it. Attached was a note. For the new babies. Don't ever let them grow up to be like me. I sank to the floor in the hallway and wept. Not for Grant, but for the tragedy of it all. For the waste of a life. He could have had everything. That very night, I went into labor. It was fast, loud, and beautiful. Preston was by my side every second. And then they were here. 2 loud, red, and perfect boys. Ethan and Liam. As the nurse placed them on my chest, a circle closed. The hole in my heart was healed. Preston cried like a baby, holding Liam as if he were made of glass. Welcome to the world, son, he whispered through tears. I'm your dad, and I promise I will take care of you." Later, Holly and Hazel came in, utterly enchanted. We took a family photo, me in the hospital bed with our sons, Preston kissing my forehead, and the girls hugging us with huge smiles. We posted it online with a simple caption: "The Sterling, Vance family. Complete." I knew that somewhere, in a dingy break room across the country, Grant would see it, and that would be the final nail in the coffin of his pride. Life found a new rhythm, chaotic and wonderful. Phoenix architecture thrived. The Aurora Tower was completed, a gleaming, cornflower blue testament to our new beginning. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that cold bus stop and thanked God for the blizzard. Without the storm, I never would have found my way. 2 years later, I was in my office when my assistant buzzed me. "You need to see this." On the news, they were announcing the verdicts. Tiffany Miller, sentenced to 8 years in prison. Lance, 12 years. A final note mentioned that the former CEO, Grant Sterling, was now working as a night shift manager at a logistics center in a small town. I turned off the TV. Justice. Cold, hard, and absolute. I picked up the phone and called Preston. "Hey," he answered warmly. "Everything okay?" "Everything is perfect," I smiled. "I just wanted to hear your voice." "Just picking up the girls from school. Feel like Thai for dinner?" "Yes, and get double spring rolls." "You got it. I love you, my architect." "I love you too, my builder." I hung up and swiveled my chair to look out at the city. Grant wanted a legacy. He thought a legacy was a name carved in stone or a son to carry on his DNA. He was wrong. A true legacy isn't what you leave behind in concrete. It's what you leave behind in people's hearts. My legacy was my strong, independent daughters, my wonderful sons, and the partner who treated me as his equal. Grant invited me to his wedding to humiliate me. Instead, he gave me the perfect stage to claim my crown. Our own wedding was nothing like Grant's farce. We married in the garden of the new home I had designed myself open, full of light, with no walls, only gardens. I wore a simple white silk dress. Holly and Hazel were my maids of honor. Ethan and Liam, now toddlers, were our ring bearers, though they mostly just tried to chew on the pillows. There were no cameras, no investors, just our closest friends. As we said our vows, Preston wept. I wept with him. "I promise," he said, his voice breaking, "that you will never face another blizzard alone." "And I promise," I replied, "that we will build a life so strong that no storm can ever tear it down." We danced under the stars, the same stars that had once watched me shiver at a bus stop. Grant was a distant memory, a faded scar. He was the villain of my story, yes, but he was also the catalyst. Without his cruelty, I never would have found my strength. Without his rejection, I never would have found Preston. Without his obsession with sons, I never would have cherished my daughters so fiercely. In a strange way, I had forgiven him. Not for him, but for me. I needed to release the anger. My heart was too full of love to waste space on hate. As the night ended, I stood on the terrace, watching my family. Holly was teaching Preston a new dance. Hazel was chasing the twins across the grass. This was my legacy, not built on male heirs or corporate mergers, but on survival, kindness, and the refusal to be broken. I raised my glass to the moon. To all the foolish exes, I whispered with a smile, may they keep inviting us to their weddings, and may we always have a private jet ready to go.